All right, let's get started. Thank you all for those folks who've already introduced yourself. Lots of amazing things to see in the chat. Cassandra has a corgi, I don't know how to pronounce that, running up and down the hallway in her office. Pat is 2 for 2 on today's Wordle. Please don't spoil it for us, Pat. Brett and Carl are looking forward to a whole bunch of snow. Candace is getting a bunch more volunteers at her food bank, which is great news. So it looks like Christine is feeling better after recovering from COVID, which makes us really happy, Christine. Bridget's doing well. Emily's doing yoga this morning. Jim's coming in from Maine. So really, really excited to see everybody. Get comfortable. We've got a lot to cover today. I hope you have some tea or coffee or water, whatever you need. And let's dive in. So we are going to talk about writing, which matters to a considerable degree in our jobs, and we're super excited about this. We'll go pretty quickly because there is a lot to cover. We will send the slides and the recording after the fact because we'll talk quickly and want to get a lot of stuff in here to help you all out. Thanks to my colleague Simone. This is good for 1.0 CFRE credits to help your professional development. Just a quick note here, we'll put a survey in the chat at the end. You just say, I would like to be entered into the records. We don't give you any official record keeping. We are here in case CFRE audits you. Pretty unlikely to happen, but does happen sometimes. So make sure you fill out that survey at the end. And just a quick note. Today's agenda, pretty straightforward. We're going to talk a lot about writing to many people at once. We're going to talk about writing to one person at a time. We're going to talk about texting, which is increasingly important and probably going to be a big part of your strategy in 2022. As I said already, the recording and slides will be available after the fact. So, so don't stress if you feel free to furiously take notes if that's for you, but feel free to skip it and just hang back if that's better as well. Quick intros. My name is Patrick. I'm the co-CEO of an organization called FreeWill, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny, who is just great and brilliant. But moreover, we're really lucky to work alongside what is now 150 people, engineers, designers, fundraising experts, a couple of lawyers who are great. And we are closing in so close to hitting $5 billion in money raised and committed to charity through our tools, and we're really, really proud of that. So I know a bunch of FreeWill folks are on the call, and just a big shout out to all the hard work that's been happening. Why am I so passionate about writing? Partly in one of my previous lives, I ran email fundraising for President Obama. And regardless of your politics and how you feel about the president, I think most people agree that there was a lot of cutting edge stuff happening here in terms of creativity and fundraising and digital fundraising, particularly email fundraising. And why was this? It's not that we were smarter than other folks. It's just that we had 10 million people that we could email. We raised more than $100 million. And so what we would do is constantly run experiments, what we call A/B tests, this or that. And usually they ended up being A, B, C, D, E tests because we'd try 5 different things. And you could send them each to 100,000 people because there were so many people on this email list that we really got to understand what worked and what didn't, right? And the funny thing was we would always make predictions on the team and say, oh, I think this one's going to win. I think that one is going to win. And honestly, we were less good than random selection. So if you had a monkey in the room, that monkey would have won the betting pool because we really didn't, we really had strong conviction, and then we would be wrong all the time. Also, interesting thing about this picture that I notice whenever I look at it. So I've met many of you virtually, and I've met a handful of you in person. I'm actually 6'4", and so I'm quite tall. And what that means is you can tell how incredibly tall Michelle is. I mean, she sort of outpacing Barack in this, and I don't think that she's in heels. I think she's wearing flats. Very tall woman. Okay, one of the things we like to do in some of these sessions is really just as a big thank you for joining and spending time with us is give away a bunch of gifts. This time we are giving away, again, one of my very favorite books, probably one of the most influential books I've read in terms of great writing, great style, and it's been incredibly influential to me. It's called On Writing Well. It is well over 30 years old. I'm not sure the exact date of publication. We had a 30th anniversary edition quite a while ago, so it's been around for a while. Make a note in the survey if you'd like to receive this. We'll select 20 people, and then just make sure you add your address so we can actually ship it over to you. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about you before we get rolling. We asked how your week is going, and you can see we're trending back up, right? So we hit a little bit of a low point in August and then early November. Things seem to be trending at least a bit in the right direction in COVID. And you can see how this blue line tracks happiness all the way from the beginning of the pandemic. Yellow line is anxiety. You can see that sort of trending down a bit. Loneliness trending down, which is really good. And so some general positive signs here. A couple other things. We asked folks about how confident you are in hitting your goals this year, and we're moving a little bit back up. So we're almost at a 4 out of 5, which is pretty exciting to see. And hopefully we will share some things today that will make it actually more likely that you hit your goals. All right, so let's talk about writing. So that's intros, a little bit about you guys, a little bit about me, a little bit about the FreeWill team that's put a lot of work in here. And why does this even matter, right? What we're seeing is that email writing is becoming an increasingly important portion of giving. So 19% of all online donations came from email in 2020, 14% in 2019. We're anxiously awaiting 2021 stats coming out. For every 1,000 emails sent, nonprofits got $78, which was a 35% increase over the year previous, right? Which means not only are more people doing it, but actually each email is individually more effective, which is really, really good news. Better emails equals a higher open rate, better response rate, more dollars raised. Obviously, this is important. So you know this. The other thing we're seeing is that email is increasingly playing a massive role in all types of giving, not just small dollar giving, which was historically its primary role. So we saw in our own work that what we call standalone email. So standalone means it's just about one thing. It's not, bullet 5 in a five-part newsletter, are twice as effective at securing new bequests, right? And these bequests are $60,000, $100,000, $500,000 a piece than newsletters. We also see that for planned and major giving, when we asked you, in-person visits tended to be the top most effective way to do it. One-to-one email is really important. And then phone and video calls tend to be really important. So this is, you can see that what we're seeing is more and more of the larger gifts are moving into email correspondence or even text correspondence, which we'll talk to you about later. Part of this is that younger and older donors are moving online in a huge way. So 28% of online donations in 2020 came from a mobile device. Virtually all of your donors are regularly using the internet. Older Americans are spending twice as much time online as they did 3 years ago. This is a massive shift. And what they're doing online is also getting more sophisticated. So many of you have seen this in your own life, maybe in the lives of your parents, things like mortgages, car shopping, looking for houses, medical diagnosis, financial information, taxes, all this stuff that people would have thought never happening on the internet, especially for older folks, has all transitioned online in a really big way. So this is a real, remember that charitable giving is just a very small part of most people's lives and a very small part of our society, and it mirrors and usually follows the trends that happens elsewhere. People are also doing more pre-research. They want to read before they speak, which means your online writing is also super important, meaning your website writing. And then the same is true of planned and major giving donors. So what we're increasingly seeing is more large gifts happening out of the blue or in response to an individual or a one-to-many email than you might have seen a few years ago, where everybody wants to have many conversations before that. People are feeling like they're getting informed, they're doing the research, they're hearing from you, and then they're making the decision without potentially some of these major conversations. One of the sort of micro trends we're seeing in 2022 and in 2021 is the rise of millennial major donors, right? Typically giving large gifts of stock, large gifts of crypto, which is really, really important. And those are often happening in the same way, only through written communication, not having phone conversations, not doing site visits as well. So this is becoming increasingly important, not just for small donors. When we ask you, how confident are you in your professional writing abilities, this is pretty good news. About 50% of you rank yourselves as a 4 on a scale of 1 to 5. How confident are you in your professional writing abilities? The average is 3.9. Not a lot of folks 5s, not a lot of folks 1, mercifully, but hopefully we'll be able to push you up along the way and at least a half point, a full point by the end of this. So what is good writing? Let's sort of make sure we're clarifying this. We're not writing to win Pulitzers, right? We are writing to get outcomes. And when we think about outcome-driven writing, there are a couple of things that are really important. Good writing is exceedingly clear. The statistic I'm about to show you is actually one of the things that has most influenced my writing and even a lot of these sessions. My colleague Simone uncovered a year and a half ago or so. It's easy to understand. It can be skimmed for main takeaways. It appeals to a broad audience. This is really important. Emails written at a third grade level receive 36% more responses than those at a college reading level, and 17% more than those at a high school reading level, right? So too often people are writing to make themselves sound smart. Make yourself sound super clear. You will seem smart, and you'll have much better outcomes here. And so it's really informed all of our work to be able to break down things as simply and clearly as possible for you all, for donors, et cetera. And it doesn't mean you're not able to convey complex ideas, complex scenarios, complex strategies, but we're really amplifying clarity as our #1 goal. It's also concise. We see this constant mistake that nonprofits make and nonprofit professionals. What do we mean? We mean that you spend an hour drafting an email to a bunch of supporters, right? And maybe do it on a laptop. You've got this really big screen over here and you're writing it all. And then it goes to your boss, and your boss does the same thing, right? He or she is working from home. They've got a big screen. They've got a big monitor next to them. And that's how they're reading it. Now, the problem is that 50% of emails are now read on mobile phones. So you're actually reading it in a fundamentally different manner than most of your donors are reading it. And so what we need is fewer, stronger words. We're cutting out unnecessary details as much as possible. We're keeping it short. 2 to 3 paragraphs really works. 50 to 125 words really works. And this is a shift from what would have been really important when we were doing email fundraising in 2010. So it's a really important shift to make sure we're writing for things to be consumed on mobile phones to a much greater degree than we would have even a few years ago. It's also persuasive, right? So telling stories of an individual is the thing that will most connect with our brains. Presenting general statistics alongside an individual story decreases gifts. Let me be super clear here, because everybody loves throwing stats in because you think that's what other people want to hear. It actually doesn't necessarily connect to the same degree. We also want to use repetition and reasons. We'll talk more about this in a second. Social proof, comparisons, we'll talk about that as well. So first thing to check that in is this an emotional story? So over neutral emails, moderately negative emails, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm sad, receive 13% more responses. And happy emails receive 15% more responsive than neutral, right? So we just don't want to be flat. It's okay to be angry and upset about things. It's okay to be happy and elated and excited about things. Staying really even keel might make you seem very professional. It's going to actually reduce overall outcomes. Good writing is also strong storytelling. So what happens is compelling stories activate the brain and strengthen emotional connections. Smell and taste details, when you write about them, activate the brain's sensory cortex. Movement details activate the motor cortex. You know, I was actually, I rewatched the movie Jurassic Park last night. Has anyone seen it recently? I think it's a top 10 movie of all time. It's really remarkable. And I was thinking about this session while watching it, and I could notice, right, when you've got these 2 kids and the archaeologist running from dinosaurs, obviously my heart quickens. I'm safely on a couch, right? I'm watching TV. It's a very nice environment. Safely on a couch, heart quickens. Even notice sort of the muscles in my legs tense up a little bit in case my mind was telling me you might want to be ready to run, even though we're obviously watching a movie. Carolyn corrects me and says these are paleontologists, not archaeologists. Thank you, Carolyn. But you can sort of sense that, and that's the kind of writing that we want to do. The brains will light up the same way as if the story was happening to us personally, and that really moves folks to action when they're otherwise in a complacent place. Narrative arcs that produce love and stress hormones affect the way we feel and affect how we act. There's an experiment done that showed that participants who watched an emotional story, which produced oxytocin in the brain, were more willing to donate to charity afterwards. So super important. All right, let's talk about putting this into action. We're going to do 5 tips on writing for mass appeals. This is what we think of as hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, in some cases millions. And then we'll talk about writing for a one-on-one audience. Okay, real question in the chat, if you don't mind. How much time do you normally spend coming up with a subject line for an email that you're going to send out to a bunch of donors? So feel free to type it in the chat now. 10 seconds, too long, way too long. 8 seconds, 10 seconds. Some people say an hour. All right, so as quickly as possible. Look, I would put a timer on, and for anything going to more than a few people, minimum 2 minutes, right? Which means keep writing different options. 67% of people say the subject line of an email influences whether they'll open it. We would test subject lines only sometimes with the Obama email list, and we would see 20, 25%, 35% shifts, right? Exact same message, which we spent so much time writing, and subject line, which only took us a second to come up with, would have massive variance. And this is really, really important. So there's online timers or use your phone, 2-3 minutes. And what the best thing to do actually is just write for 2 or 3 minutes. Come up with as many options as you can, and good outcomes come from having good options. A nonprofit sends an average of 59 emails to each subscriber a year. Nearly half of these tend to be fundraising appeals. You really need to stand out, right? It's not simply thinking about this on your own. You're thinking about this in contrast to other fundraising emails. We talked about this last week. Political season's about to heat up in a few months. Some really big Senate races in a lot of places where you all are, and that's going to drive a ton of email on top of hotels, restaurants, plays, museums, whatever marketing stuff you guys are signed up for. All of this stuff is happening in every inbox, and we need to stand out. How do we do that? We really focus on what we call the curiosity gap. This is the gap between what we know currently and what we want to know. So when we talk about this, with a subject line, you want to pique interest and you want to withhold key information to encourage open rates. Here's what that looks like. It's like pausing at the story at a climactic moment. You can introduce an idea that has an unlikely outcome, but you don't want to overpromise, underdeliver. That is what we call clickbait. It's not real, and irrelevance is the top factor that turns people off of email. Here's what this looks like in a study by SendGrid. You can see in red, irrelevance is the top reason that people get turned off. Obviously, unknown senders. So it's really important that people can recognize where you're sending from, unpersonalized content, etc. When we think about this, here are a couple of examples. A new trend we are seeing, right? Thought of you today. A big change at the land trust. Our cutest puppy of the week. What the student accomplished. The 2 most impactful steps. A tool that is getting a lot of use. A better way to help, right? When we say withholding, we're only very briefly doing it only in the subject line, right? The email has to then deliver on the core promise of that subject line. Now that we have their attention, we need to grab attention in the first line of the email once they've opened it, right? So we're each stacking these things on top of each other. An average woman reads an email for only about 7 seconds before deciding whether to continue to read. And research shows that the average man reads for only 2 seconds, which, be more patient, guys, generally. But it means we only have really that first sentence to figure out whether someone who's said, yes, I'm interested in opening this email is going to continue to read it. We have about 8 seconds total to catch people's attention before they move on. And you want to start with the most important information for your reader. So things like a big update for your organization, a big news about your work or your mission, how you're providing value to the reader, or what they might be doing to make the kind of change that they want to in the world. So we've already piqued interest with the subject line. We're starting to deliver value with the first line. Here's a couple of examples what that might look like. Making a list for spring cleaning. Here's one thing you actually need to check off. There's a huge change underway at the museum, and I thought you might like to know. The class of 2022 is facing 3 big challenges right now. And you can mentally put yourself in the reader's mind and say, okay, that would make me at least want to continue a little bit to better understand this. I want to share what Jane Doe, or whatever volunteer name, did this week, and I hope it makes you really happy, right? These are all things that are really going to push people to continue reading, continue engaging, and not just read, but put a little bit more focus on what you're about to tell them. Then as we get to the core of it, good fundraising emails really center around what we call this impact gap. Super important. What would be newly possible with the help of the person reading the email? As an example, we're going to define the current situation we're in. This month, our animal rescue took in several new litters. And then we're defining the problem. But our shelter is facing rising pet food costs, and the litters need extensive veterinary care. And then the solution, with your support, we can make sure the kittens get the food and the help they need to be adopted and thrive in their forever homes, right? Forever homes tends to be a term used by a lot of shelters. And so what do we have here? We have what's the problem? What's the future? and then what's the gap that the donor or the supporter can fill. And it's super clear, right? There's nothing in here that's sort of beyond fourth grade language. It's really actionable. It feels achievable, and we're making movement here. Tangible impact in some ways always wins. One share of stock could provide 80 meals for hungry families. This scholarship will help one lower income student shift the course of her life. And then sometimes people say, you know, it's not like the Heifer Project where everything is sort of perfectly allocated to one area, and that's okay. But something like a gift from your IRA will help us reach the 90% threshold for the class of 1965. All right, this money is going into potentially a general fund, so you're not going to tie it to these specific books or, you know, this subsidized admission to the opera, but it's very clear that we're moving something along and that my gift matters. Great. When we're doing this, there's some really interesting, thoughtful stuff in the chat, so feel free to pay attention to that as well. Some indirect asks really sort of have to combine with direct asks. So when we're storytelling or on updates, you can link to ways they can help. And you really, really want to include major and planned gifts, because we don't want to just shepherd people towards these tiny gifts that are $50 when someone could be giving us $5,000 in a gift of stock. So a direct ask would be a call to action, right? 3 ways that the person can help. And then, you know, you might want to sort of say in that moment of, if we can get books to the students right now, if we can get enough veterinary care for the new kids, if we can, you know, welcome enough students back to the museum who've been without sort of in-person history for a year, you know, that you can link as well and bring it to a giving page. All right, when we think about tone of voice, sometimes, and this is especially true, by the way, for the youngest fundraisers, right? Folks who are 2, 3, 4 years into their career, sometimes you want to sound like too much, sort of what you think an adult sounds like. And instead, you really want to be informal and keep it conversational, right? Tone of voice matters. You can think letter to a friend. If all your friends are sort of wild and still pretty young, think about writing it to a friend of your mom, right? Someone who you don't have to be hyper formal with, but you're still, you know, being polite and kind. Like you're speaking to a close friend or a family member. Some people actually will put a picture of their target audience, right? They'll figure out, okay, who do I know personally who sort of fits with our donor profile? And I'm just going to write to that person in the tone I would use for that, for everybody, rather than try to sort of make it sound like a business memo. And we're using simple human language. Remember, this is 3rd grade reading level, especially when we're talking about complicated gifts types. So I think sometimes people want to talk about annuities or stock giving or planned gifts or donor advised funds, and suddenly they feel like they have to start talking like an actuary, when in fact that's the time where you really, really want to lean in on simple, clear, comfortable, helping people be confident about this stuff. And so that's super important. We're cutting out jargon, we're cutting out big words. All the research shows that when you say things like, you know, make a gift of appreciated assets, it performs way worse than like, hey, do you want to give stock and help save on taxes? Right? We want to cut out as much jargon as possible. And you know, some of you are going to have a 4th grader or 5th grader at home, and feel free to talk to them and say, do you know what this word means? Do you know what that word means? Does this sentence seem clear? And if they don't know what it is, don't send it to your donors. All right. Now we're thinking about some one-on-one emails. And many of these tips, by the way, will be true, continually true for the mass emails. Does anyone know what this picture is of, by the way? Okay, a couple of good guesses. Katie, Rick says a mission in California, which is technically true. It's Stanford University, right? Stanford, I just checked, by the way, has an endowment of like $37 billion, right? Maybe it's down a little bit after this week in the stock market. And Stanford writes asking me for money, which sort of feels crazy because I think, oh, you guys should give me money. Like, you know, it's such a wealthy, you know, it's such a wealthy institution. It's like Goliath asking David for something, right? But what they do really well, when you know, I get a lot of emails from like the Center for Social Justice over there and the Center for Social Innovation and stuff that's really sort of near and dear to my heart. And it always comes from one person, right? And it's vulnerable and human. Here's an example of what it looks like, but it will talk about a specific program and it'll talk about their specific existence rather than writing as this giant monolith of Stanford University, which is sort of wealthy beyond all reasonable measures. So as an example, this is not from Stanford, but this would be, writing with personal connections. I'm fostering one of our newest puppies. It's been hard trying to help him adjust to people before he finds his forever home, but I'm writing because this matters more than ever, right? So we're really reminding people that this is just another human on the other end of it. You want to be empathetic. I know it's a more hectic time than usual for you as you and your family navigate daycare opening and closing, right? This is if you know the person is having these issues. And when we think about writing as a person, we really want to remove the we as much as possible. So remember that in your personal emails, you basically never write from we unless maybe you're writing from you and your spouse. Keep communication personal with the I unless you're writing from multiple people, and really don't write from multiple people unless there's a very clear reason to do so, right? For the most part, emails come from one person at a time. If you have a personal connection to the cause, make it known, right? So many people want to sort of take their own reasons for working somewhere out of it, and that actually tends to not be a good idea. Here's an example. A 2011 study found that people that have a much harder time saying no to an appeal when the advocate or the writer has a personal connection to the cause. They don't want to be seen as disrespectful or uncaring, and they may or may not be more convinced by the cause's merits, but they're much more motivated to take action. And even if they're already committed to the cause's merits, they're still much more likely to take action. So here's an example. I'm writing today on behalf of the University Alumni Foundation. Because of the foundation, I was the first person in my family to graduate college. I'd love to tell you more about the work we're doing to help more first-generation students reach their full potential. Do you have 5 minutes to talk on Tuesday, right? And if you take out the personal component, right, that I was the first person in my family to graduate college, then suddenly this becomes a much less impactful thing, right? And if you work in a museum, it doesn't have to be that this museum was the instrumental in your childhood if you grew up 2,000 miles away. But you can say, I'm working here because museums like this one changed the course of my life, and I really wanted to make sure to contribute. Would love to talk to you about ways we're contributing to, open the eyes of children, right? Think really about why do you have the job besides, I need a salary and it's a good place to be hiring. What connected you to the mission, even if you're not a student there, right? I went to a similar school somewhere else, or I've had the experience of spending 3 years here talking to individual students and learning about how Gettysburg College is affecting their lives every day, and it makes me more motivated. I'd love to share what's motivating me, or I'd love to share what I've seen. And that sort of feeling will make you incredibly more impactful than just sort of being this sort of third-party distant voice. All right, a couple more tips. Tapping into social proof tends to be really, really important. We are social creatures as a species. You want to tell stories about other supporters. So you don't want to say something like, hey, you can save up to 80% on taxes through giving stock. That seems great. What's more effective, though, is someone in the class above you, also from California, just donated stock and got an almost 80% tax benefit. Can I share more about what she did? That tends to be really, really powerful. People like to be followers in this context. Simple example here, our friend Dr. Russell James did a ton of work, and so did a British organization called the Cabinet Office Behavioral Insights Team, focused really on planned giving. As a side note, the UK, planned giving is sort of one area where non-US philanthropy, and particularly British philanthropy, is way ahead of American philanthropy. American philanthropy tends to sort of lead the world in a lot of other contexts. But you can see here, when we didn't ask, which is the norm of, do you want to leave a bequest in your will? Only 5% of people would do it. When you did ask, you doubled it. And when you ask, saying many people choose to do this, would you like to do it as well? You've tripled the baseline. And so, the FreeWill tools that we use are actually now the #1 estate planning tool in the country. Just passed legalism this year, thanks to a lot of hard work from some of the folks listening. So congratulations to you all. And we put in all this best language, and we've seen that 20% of people are leaving bequests, which is pretty remarkable. Just these small tweaks are literally leading to billions of dollars in more giving, and that's super exciting. Okay, what doesn't work is what we call negative social proof. So only a fraction of our supporters will respond. Will you be one of them? This tends to not work. I don't know if anyone's ever been to the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. It's stunning. But they tried 2 different signs, and they observed negative social proof. They were struggling, by the way, with people taking petrified wood, sort of very appealing thing to take. And so one sign said, please don't remove petrified wood. The other said, many past visitors have removed petrified wood. Please don't do it. It actually tripled the number of thefts, because once we realized what other people were doing, people copied them, even though the sign was asking them to do exactly the opposite. Super interesting stuff here. We're just incredibly influenced by what we see peers do and what we hear about peers doing. This, by the way, is especially important in areas where people don't talk about it much, right? So major giving, types of giving, planned giving, social proof is incredibly important because most people don't have exposure to what other people do. And so you simply informing what other folks do ends up being incredibly impactful. A couple other tips here. When you're sharing things that might be new to the donor or the supporter, you can use language like "did you know," or "you might be surprised to learn," which triggers curiosity and reduces defensiveness. When you say something that is inherently sort of unlike what people previously believed, we have a natural mental defensiveness, and it starts to unwind that and makes them much more receptive. Some supporters are surprised that they can receive more than 50% in tax savings when donating stock, more than 70% in some cases. Now, not only does this use surprise, it also uses social proof, and it makes it easier to be like, oh, those people are surprised, right? And it makes it, but you probably knew this, right? It sort of creates this dynamic where people become much more welcoming to new language. Number 9, one of my favorite studies, provide a reason to give. Don't just ask, always make sure that you have a real clear because why this is happening. When you ask for a favor, you will be much more successful when you provide a reason. Here is one of my favorite studies. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. So it is 1978. It's Harvard. Professor Ellen Langer works in a grad student office. And like a lot of great research studies, this is run on grad students because they are around. And those of you remember in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, there's always a line of the copy machine, right? It's just sort of part of office life. And so what they would do is, there's always this line, they would send a grad student to try to cut the line. And the grad student says, excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine? Now, it turns out that people in the faculty and the grad student office are pretty friendly, and so 60% of people say, yes, you can cut. Now, when they shift the language to give a very clear reason, excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? 94% of people say, yeah, go for it. So suddenly we've made this massive shift, right? 50% basically, or 35% increase here in people allowing it, right? So simple, same ask, just same person asking the same people or very similar people. But then what happened was they sent the same student back and said, excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine because I need to make copies, which obviously is true in the first and the second instance, but even adding that additional reason led to almost as much benefit as that real reason, right? And this is actually like statistically insignificant, so it could be equal. So that's really striking, right? Just make sure you're always layering reasons on, almost regardless of how important those reasons are. 10, you now have the technology to do this. Personalization is really key. Hearing your own brain triggers brain activation, right? So let's pretend we've tried this before. The average person on this call is about 40. Let's say at least half of them are female. If you were born in the United States in sort of 80, 81, 82, Jennifer is the most common female name, right? And those of you who are Jennifer are listening much more intently to this slide than anybody else is. And if you are Jen King says it's true. So if you're Jennifer, feel free to chime in. Jennifer Zettler says yes, because it just triggers, right? It's sort of everyone's favorite word in the English language is their own name. And what happens is, this is true in the parts associated with social behavior and long-term memory. It tells your brain to pay attention. This information is relevant to you. And personalized experiences give you a greater sense of control and reduces information overload. Many of you, and tell me if this is accurate, if you are in sort of a major urban, suburban area, one of the sort of big changes in technology in the last 5 years is just this massive rise of food ordering apps, right? Seamless and Grubhub and Uber Eats and DoorDash and Postmates and all these things. And I assume many of you have used these. And when you do that, it'll just say you'll order and you'll say the restaurant has received it. Tori is now putting your order in the oven. Michael's on his way to pick it up. Michael has picked up the food. Michael's where this is where he is. Here's a map. He will be arriving at 10:18, and they could just tell you that he's arriving at 10:18. And it doesn't really, the food doesn't get there any faster, but having this sort of like hyper clear makes you feel way more comfortable and confident in the whole experience, and makes people use those apps to a much greater degree. And I think the same is true actually in fundraising. So how do we put this in order, or in practice rather? Obviously, addressing reader by name. I assume you're all doing this by now. Go beyond name, right? Remember, refer back to personal information your donor has shared with you. What was their favorite piece of art? What's the class year? What's the kids or spouse names? Send progress updates for causes they previously donated to, and name specific dates. Specific dates is an incredibly easy thing to implement because you have all of those records, right? Every gift you have has a date attached to it. And so just as an example, you could send a photo of somebody, you're a museum and you opened a new exhibit last year. And this gift went to the general fund, right? It's not necessarily a massive gift that sort of funded this whole exhibit, because then you should be doing a bunch more. And say, one of the things, here's a photo of a bunch of people really appreciating this exhibit. One of the things, your gift that you made last year on September 18th funded was this exhibit, and I wanted to show you the impact of it, right? That sort of reporting back with the specificity, not just thank you for your gift, it's allowed us to do tons of amazing things this year. It happened on this date, and it funded this important thing, among other things, right? Again, it doesn't have to be hyper-targeted giving from a sort of financial strategy standpoint, but it's really, really important. And that stuff just makes a donor's day. It's really important. Quick bonus tip before we get on to some resources and tips for you, using what we call the presumptive close, right? You want to communicate excitement and interest in speaking with folks. I can't wait to share more about the benefits of stock giving with you. And you want to give specific options instead of saying yes or no. Do say, would Thursday or Friday be better for a phone call? And don't say, would you like to schedule a call, right? They can always say no. You're not forcing anyone to anything, but really sort of presenting this as, this is the likely next step. Let's talk about how to make it happen, instead of, would you like to take the next step? It really just takes some of the mental load off of the donor or supporter and moves you along a lot faster. Okay, that is a whole bunch of stuff on email. One thing that is increasingly important in 2022, and will likely be increasingly important every year of this decade, is text messages, right? They may be more important than email. Nonprofit text lists, grew by 26% in 2020, compared to 3% growth in email lists. Marketing texts have a 94% average open rate, compared to 15%, right? So more than 6 times for email. Click rates are 6.3% for fundraising and 10% for advocacy, massively higher than email. People in a nonprofit's texting program are 60 to 90% more likely to donate than those who only receive emails. And now part of this is correlation, right? The people that sign up for more stuff have higher affinity, but part of it's really causation. Many donors, especially younger donors, prefer text to calls, but even 94% of folks over 70 text on a weekly basis, right? This is near universal to the degree of phone calls or emails. A couple tips here. Use your first one to build connection. Send updates on your mission, stories about volunteers, people your organization helps. Include images and links. Keep it short and personal. These should feel even more intimate than your emails. As an example, a couple of things that are clear and sharp. By the way, if you haven't, if it's not abundantly clear where this is coming from, you can send your first text that says, hey, this is Patrick over at the conservatory, or Patrick at the advocacy organization, right? And then Sarah, we're hosting an election briefing on Thursday to share what we're planning for the midterms. Should I send you a link? Hey, do you know someone looking to adopt? Here's a photo of one of our puppies looking for a home. John, we're planning our next steps at the Alumni Association. Do you have 90 seconds to take a short survey? And all of these are going to get very high response rates compared to even exactly the same message over email. Next level, really integrate texting to all your fundraising communications, right? So you want to be getting to text relationships with major and plan giving donors. Once a month, send a quick note and a photo to keep folks engaged. You can go look through your family text chains, right? Or some of you have WhatsApp chains with your friends. This is the type of stuff you can be sharing with your donors, right? Here's a quick photo. Here's something we saw, just thought of you. Doesn't need an immediate response. We have a whole text thinking of you template. We'll send it to you if you sort of make a quick note of the survey. Really, really effective, right? These sort of out of the blue, hey, I saw this thing that you helped to fund. I just wanted to let you know about it. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And all they'll say is like, wow, thanks, right? But the next time you ask, it's going to be much more likely that they're going to give a gift and a large one. Sometimes people say, is texting too personal? The obvious answer is no here. Just after email and social ads, text are the channel people say they're most likely to engage with. Boomers actually overwhelmingly engage with email and text more than anyone else. Nearly 70% of people say they sometimes or frequently or very frequently engage with marketing texts. You know, the other thing I'll say on texting is that phone calls are too personal for many people, right? And so moving, especially with your millennial major donors, they don't want to be called on the phone. If, you know, many of you who are sort of millennial or Gen Z, maybe younger Gen X, if you get a call out of the blue from a friend, sometimes you just assume something's wrong, right? And it's sort of this feeling of like, whoa, you're calling me, wow, without, you know, even like a you free text or something like that. And I think the same will be true of your donors, right? So you can always text and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes today? Set up a phone call, but it tends to be a really good way to keep ongoing communication. All right, so in summary, and feel free to print this out and just put it next to your desk, because if you can follow these steps, you will have dramatically better emails and more effective stuff. Does the subject line inspire curiosity? If it doesn't, take 2 more minutes. If I read for 4 seconds, well, I want to read more. If not, just rework it, it's okay. Does a 3rd grader know almost all the words in the message? You can, you know, add a couple here or there, but if it's really jargon heavy, because you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, the donor will be turned off and probably turn away. Do I give reasons for what I'm asking? Is it written by a human to a human? Could I imagine writing this to my friend? Did I include an image? We didn't talk much about this, but a single photo can be a really powerful addition. And just do this, right? And if you do these, you will mostly have success. It's not magic, but it will be considerable upgrades over a lot of the stuff that folks are writing. And by the way, a lot of people are using slides like this to onboard someone new, right? Just making sure that you know, you may have it all figured out, probably some folks in your org that are a little farther behind. So it's gonna be a good resource. All right, and we asked, before we sign off here, a couple of things from you all. We asked what your most effective strategies are. Words like gift, appeal, donor, person, one really show up. And then more qualitatively, a couple of folks mentioned, or quantitatively rather, 25% of you said stories or storytelling are your dominant strategy. 22% of you mentioned personalization as your dominant strategy, and 18% mentioned highlighting impact as your dominant strategy. So all good options. A couple of things that you surfaced, and this example is from you all. After the in-person ask, we sent a personal thank you card along with any materials to back up the passion project. This one I really, really love because I think it highlights this sort of personal narrative. I focus on our students and relaying my own teaching, my own coaching, advising, and dorm parenting experiences, an authentic understanding of our students or our alumni and our mission, right? Talking from a space of sort of deep personal authenticity really connects the donor with you and really sort of makes it hard to say no without sounding salesy or pushy. Another person wrote in, start strong and directly, beginning, middle, end, use of impact stories, use of metaphors, focusing on shared values, demonstrating the need and the purpose for funding, approach the way I would like to be approached, which is really important, right? Very few people read it as the donor for either of these 2 significant appeals. Personalized, individualized messages that refer to their specific experience or gift. Can't say this enough, especially when you're writing one-on-one stuff. These small personalizations are really, really valuable. For major gifts, describing impact and specific needs requiring special support. And then for planned gifts, really focusing on gratitude. I really love this. For loyalty, for consistency and appreciation of their long-term impact. This is really, really good stuff. So thank you guys all for sharing. And then lastly, combining these 3 elements, which this person writes in, a bright, beautiful photo, a heartwarming story, and an illustration of statistic demonstrating impact. By the way, you could drop this statistic, which is, I know feels counterintuitive, but the research shows that you might actually do a little bit better. And so, or keep it very minimal at minimum. All right, so that's our best stuff on helping you be better writers. A couple of resources to share. Again, this book, do not put your address in the chat. It will get lost in the ether. My colleague Simone is gonna put a link right now into the chat. So do click on that, fill it out, and that will help. Couple other things. We have some resources for you. Again, a bunch of folks on our team created this guide on how to write effective emails and the texting templates that we spoke about. Just make a small note in the survey if you want to receive these, and we'll follow up with them later today. So basically what happens is the recording processes for an hour or so, we get the slides together, and then we'll send it out to you. You can also obviously share this with your coworkers and other folks that might be helpful for. And then a couple of things that we're super proud of, in case you're interested, is we've created best-in-class tools to really simplify and clarify a bunch of the biggest gifts, right? So for stock giving, for qualified charitable distributions, which is one of the fastest types of giving that's growing, for bequests, this tool has generated more than $4 billion in new planned gifts. And all of these tools are supported by our partner success team, which just puts in all these best practices all the time to help you be incredibly successful. And also, excuse me, some new crypto tools. We've created a whole bunch of tools with sort of no upfront cost to help you take crypto, which is really, really key for securing gifts from millennial major donors, which I know is a strategy that a lot of people are leaning into. So cool stuff there. And just a big shout out to everyone. The FreeWill team has been working really hard on those. Two things happening this week on Thursday. One is I am doing a quick demo of the crypto tools I just described to you. So if you want to join that, feel free to eat during your lunch break or whatever, and just sit back and check it out and see what other people are doing. Actually, about 500 organizations have already signed up for these tools, so people are really, really excited. And then our planned and major giving tools used by more than 800 folks are going to be walked through by my friend and my colleague Alyssa, who's just wonderful, and she'll sort of answer all questions and show you what other orgs are doing. So if you're interested, sign up for that. You can also get one-on-one, what we call demonstrations, if that's more comfortable and useful to you. Okay, we are going to take a 60-second break. I'm going to read a whole bunch of questions that you wrote in. We'll sort of filter them for the most common. If you can use the 6 seconds to take the survey, that's a really big help to us, because it then lets us sort of figure out what we should be doing better next time, what else you want to hear about. It's also one of the kindest things you can do for everybody else on this call, because all of those folks are also going to be thinking about what sort of resources are they need. So any suggestions you have in terms of resources we can provide, future topics, obviously helpful to you, very helpful to us, and really helpful to the 1,000 or so other people on the call. So please take a minute to fill that out. Just to social proof you for a second, well over 2/3 of people usually fill out the survey, and it's been really, really helpful to us every time. So I'm going to look at the questions. You guys take a second to do that, and then we'll be right back. All right. Okay, some really good questions. We have about, I'm gonna probably do 5 minutes of questions, then we'll give everyone a 5-minute break before your next meeting or event or what have you. Okay, can you comment on a well-written letter versus an email? Does your research see emails getting buried, et cetera? So there are a couple of things that are happening here. Direct mail is a different medium than email, and so we should treat them differently. What we're seeing across the board is a real rise in efficacy of email and a slight decrease in direct mail. One of the things that's really notable is that the online forms of giving are almost as prevalent, or sort of more prevalent among every generation until you get to the silent generation. Silent generation is the folks born before the baby boomers, so like 75 plus. But even among that group, online giving is a very close second to mail giving. And so just to sort of making a really clear point here, email is becoming increasingly effective with all age demographics and is more effective with almost all demographics. But different mediums. So a lot of the same things apply, but in a different context, right? So the envelope is super important, right? The envelope is the subject line. Are you going to get me to open this? Then we start thinking about, am I going to be reading the first paragraph, the first 2 lines? Now, what's different? Obviously, no one reads direct mail on their phone. So you have a little bit more space, right? You can include more pictures, right? Really big glossy pictures. And then obviously the sort of reply mechanic is super important, right? Email tends to be pretty standard. It's a link. That's okay. That's the best practice. Figuring out whether you really want to focus on checks or credit cards or driving people to a website or introducing new types of giving, all of this stuff is really important. So the length is obviously the biggest difference. Thinking really about that envelope as the subject line, because people are getting a lot of mail the same way they get a lot of email. And then obviously things like list quality is super important, but we can talk more about that. Eve asks, where can you get your specific writing piece judged for grade reading level? And my colleague Simone actually loves to suggest what we call the Hemingway app. So I don't know if it's free or if it costs anything. I assume it's pretty cheap. We obviously have no relationship with them, but it will. Hemingway is sort of famous for very concise writing. It will judge your reading level and it will give you a sense, and may often make some suggestions as well. So Rebecca says it's free. Thanks, Rebecca, for weighing in there. Also, this book on writing well is really, really good. Rick says, so we need to be really careful about just cutting and pasting a written letter over into an email. Yes, Rick. You yourself write letters different than you write emails, and it's really important to be authentic to the medium. So your letter is almost certainly too long to be an email. It tends to be a little bit too formal. People don't write emails the same way. Being really sort of friendly and close in an email is going to be useful. So please, please, please don't just copy and paste. Same way, by the way, that we're not just copying and pasting email into text messaging. Do we have any recommendations on how content varies in effectiveness between marketing donors and major donors? How should the type of content used vary? I really think that your aspiration is to treat all donors like you would major donors. And given you're basically stuck on time limitations there. And so what the biggest difference we see is more hyper-personalization for major donors, more focus on different giving types. We didn't talk about this much, but the single best way to increase giving from a single person is often to change the way they give, not to sort of motivate them to a whole new degree. And so really, a lot of people are really focusing their major donor communication and even their sort of like upscale annual donors on things like stock giving, donor advised fund giving, crypto giving, because these gifts are just 10 or 20 times larger than your typical cash gift. And so that's a big shift. Are there ethical considerations of telling emotional stories? I'm concerned these stories often seem exploitative. This is a good question. Being ethical here is extremely important. And so I'm trying to give some more clarity on where that line falls. I think a good test is like, would you be comfortable showing it to the person who it's about, and probably getting their sign off, right? If it's specific, and you're not treating them like a victim, right? They're sort of someone in a certain set of circumstances that you're helping, but making in your storytelling, even if you have their sign off, make sure you're treating them with like incredible respect and value. But we all have emotional journeys, right? Including yourself, including me. And so highlighting that is actually sort of more authentic to their humanness, but making sure that you're doing so in a thoughtful and respectful way. Thank you. And that's the same goes with their photos. Great point, Annette. Are e-blasts more effective in conversions to social media? The answer is yes. Overall marketing says yes, or research says yes, but some orgs have great social engagement. Just to give you an example, this is outdated, but when I was doing this work with the Obama team, we had 10 million emails, we had 10 million Facebook followers, and we had 10 million Twitter followers. So the math was really easy. We would send out an email, and we would sometimes raise $1 million in one email from that list. We would raise $10,000 with a similar message to the Facebook group, right? So what's that math? 100 times less. And we would raise $1,000 on Twitter, right? To 10 million Twitter followers, $1,000. And so you can see the massive gap between social media and email, at least in that context. Now, some organizations are crazy good at social media, particularly folks with great video content, but that tends not to be the norm. All right, let's do one more question. I'm trying to come up with a good one. Laura asks a really good question. Is there any information about a benefit of using we when reaching communities that value collective action? Great question, Laura. When I talk about we, it doesn't mean you never actually use that word, but we're not writing from a we, we're writing from an I, right? So, hi, it's Laura. We're really worried about the sort of local park being turned into condos. And if 14 of us really show up to the town hall meeting next week, it feels like collectively we'll make our voices heard and show the communities against us, right? That's important, right? Collective action is the strategy for social change for many organizations, and we're not shying away from that. It just means that you're not writing that email on behalf of 14 people. And so you be really clear about what you're seeing and your experience, and then framing the solution as a we, and not, you're not the hero here, you're just one person who is the messenger. And so that's a really important difference, and I hope that's clear. Okay, that is it. We'll close there. There are a lot of other great questions. We'll read all the questions and work them into future resources, future sessions, but obviously don't want to hold everyone too long. Thank you so much for joining. If you haven't already, and most of you have, but if you haven't already, please fill out the survey in Zoom. Next webinar, I believe is the day after Valentine's Day, I'm not sure, we're really going to dive into donor psychology for effective stewardship. So many of you are getting new donors during the pandemic. So many of you are engaging with new folks, and sometimes those folks drop off. Some of you also have a bunch of loyal donors who could be giving 10 times more. And so we'll talk about some of the best-in-class research around what actually is going to shift people from giving once to giving 3 times, from giving 3 times to becoming either a 10-time donor or becoming a really big one. And so excited to dive in on that. And that will be 2 weeks away. So until then, have a really wonderful time. Happy Chinese New Year to those of you that are celebrating. And also happy Black History Month to everyone for whom that's a big focus, and all the folks on our team for whom that's incredibly important, including me. And so really excited about all the great things you're doing this year, and hope things continue to look up. So thanks for pushing yourself to be a little bit better at this. We know you're super busy. We know you have tons going on in your personal life on top of all the professional learning you're doing. We know that some of you have daycare getting canceled, or kids getting sent home from school, or all sorts of different family stuff to deal with as well. And the fact that you're really sort of pushing to get better at your job and better serve your mission is really admirable. So thank you, and really look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. Take care.